Welcome back, everybody, to Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host and amicable divorce expert. Why? Because that's all I do, amicable divorces. We have Virginia Gilbert in the studio today talking to us about high conflict, emotional divorce, grief, everything that each one of us goes through when we're getting divorced, even an amicable divorce. Let me tell you a little bit about Virginia. Virginia is a licensed marriage and family therapist in California, and she's been doing that for 8 years. In addition to being a psychotherapist, Virginia writes web content on divorce and mental health topics. Her work has been published in Huffington Post, Good Men Project, Weinberger Law Group blog, and numerous mental health websites. She was also the love addiction expert blogger for addiction.com. Well, if you've got to be addicted to something, Virginia, how about being addicted to love, right?
Right.
Well, depending. And lastly, Virginia's an author. She wrote a book called Transcending High Conflict Divorce, How to Disengage from Your Ex and Find Your Power. It was published this year, 2019, is available in both ebook and paperback formats on Amazon. Welcome, Virginia.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you for asking me. I'm really happy to be here today.
This is going to be great. This is going to, with all the therapists I interview, everybody brings something different to the conversation. And I love what you're bringing today. So let's get started with the questions. First one out. Describe grief as part of the divorce process. When does it begin and when does it end?
I think the question, when does it begin, is different if you're the petitioner versus the respondent. So if you're the petitioner, you've had time to probably do your homework, get your ducks in a row, and kind of mentally prepare yourself for what's going to happen. So you're a little bit further into the grief process. But if you're the respondent and this has just been sort of dumped in your lap, it's a huge shock. So that person has a longer journey to get into it. But I want to say that regardless of who initiates the divorce, if you get stuck in anger and conflict, it's going to really draw out the grief process. It's going to be very hard to work through and kind of make sense of what happened and put it in the past so you can start a new chapter.
You know, I was divorced. And I was quite surprised at the grief process. First of all, I knew we were having difficulties. I was the one asked for the divorce, and I've shared this on other episodes that I've recorded. But just hearing those words, I would like a divorce, are the most shocking words of all. And I had, and please address this, I had 2 grief processes. Didn't argue about it, but that year was the saddest year of my life. And I chose walking and exercising just to get it out of my system. Then I thought I was great. Here's the emotional roller coaster. I thought I was great, went through the filing. He was the petitioner, so he did most of the paperwork. Nothing to argue about. Divorce is over. I wasn't ready for the second wave of grief to hit me to process the finality of it. Can you please address this going in and out of the grief stage, please?
Well, grief, it's sort of like a life cycle issue. So just because you're technically legally divorced doesn't mean you're not going to feel grief again. I mean, some people feel it when a child has graduated from high school. It's like, oh, because you have sort of a vision of how things could have been and realizing it didn't end up that way. There's different times in the year that can trigger grief for people. I mean, sometimes just getting the final judgment, it's really done. It's over. There's something about kind of seeing that. So it's not like you kind of go through the grief process in a linear clip and you're done and you get a diploma and it's over. You know, it can cycle back. So it's really important to know about the stages of grief so that when you start to feel like really sad or maybe really anger or that whole kind of coulda, woulda, shoulda, like the bargaining phase of divorce, like, oh, I know what's happening. That's grief rearing its head again. I need to kind of sit with my feelings and work through this and acknowledge what's happening. So not to be like afraid of it, but yeah, it's not something that's a one and done.
Why don't we stop and name the stages of grief? I think that would be important.
You know, I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember them all, but it's there's anger, there's sadness, there's, I believe, denial, bargaining, and acceptance.
Yes.
And I find that the thing that really, besides anger, the thing that really contributes to conflict and a high conflict divorce is the bargaining. It's that, so bargaining is coulda, woulda, shoulda. It's like if I could just get my ex to see that they're doing all these things wrong, then I'll have the divorce I want, then my kids will be okay, and it'll all be fine. So that's not accepting that you can't control your ex. Like, you can't turn the clock back and marry somebody else who has a different personality. I mean, so bargaining really keeps people stuck because they're just not living in reality.
That is true. And a lot of times I find, because I write marital settlement agreements for people, because the emotion and the grief is so difficult, they will go through it and fast track it a little too much. I can tell when they're not giving it enough thought, and I know darn well that when the paperwork is done, they're going to wish they had done it differently. Any suggestions for people?
Well, it's really important, I think, to manage emotions, because the reason people speed through something is because they feel overwhelmed by their emotions. So I suggest that everybody learn some mindfulness skills, and mindfulness is really about your ability to tolerate being in the present. So if you're feeling upset or afraid, instead of trying to distance yourself from that feeling by either taking a drink or maybe writing a nasty email to your ex, is to just acknowledge it. Like, right now, I feel afraid. I feel my heart pounding, or my stomach's in knots. This is really hard right now. There's something about identifying and calling out the feelings and narrating your experience that changes your relationship to it. So it doesn't mean you're not going to feel those things. It just means that those feelings are not going to hijack you. So when those feelings hijack somebody's nervous system, then they're making unskillful choices. You know, I just want to get through it because it's so upsetting. But if you understand how to manage your emotions and then respond instead of react, you can have a better divorce.
And with that, I noticed that when we're in mediations and somebody acknowledges feeling scared, or even when people come in here for the first time to start filing, I have empathy. I know what that feels like. And I even say, how do you feel? Just to get them to acknowledge it, because after the 2 hours, they tend to settle down a little bit more. Mm-hmm. It's about acknowledging, either with yourself or in the company of the person you have to make decisions with.
Right.
Yeah? Okay, now here's the next part I think is really important. How does fighting affect the grief process?
Well, I think for a lot of people it's easier to feel angry than sad, and it's easier to feel anger than acceptance. So fighting means that you sort of project responsibility onto the other person. So everything is their fault. If they would just change what they're doing or parent the way I think they should parent, everything will be better. But you can't change another person. So again, fighting is a way of not accepting reality. And I should stop and say there are times when you need to fight. So obviously if there's legitimate reasons why somebody shouldn't have custody, or if you have a court order and they're not following the court order, then yes, you probably need to go to court and deal with that. But a lot of the things that people fight about, they don't need to fight about. I had a woman recently, I was giving a presentation, and she was going through a divorce, and she had 2 little kids, and she felt like she should have more custody. And I said, well, why is that? And she said, well, my ex-husband is mean, and my kids come home and they tell me that he's mean. And I said, well, is he abusive? I mean, is he hitting anybody? Does he have an addiction issue? No, but he's just, he snaps at them and he doesn't know how to be child-centered. And I said, well, if you had stayed married to him, would he be the same? And then there was this pause. Like, yeah, he was fundamentally the same, whether you're married or divorced. You can't now change him. But for some reason, when people get divorced, they become more invested in changing somebody. But if you couldn't change them when you're married, you definitely can't change them when you're divorced. So it's that, again, I come back to every time, inability to accept reality. My ex is the way they are. This divorce is not the way I would like it to be. There's so much that you can't change. So the fighting keeps you from accepting the reality and grieving for what didn't happen.
That's perfect, because I do remember when we, did our pre-interview and talked for a little bit, you did say, accept who your soon-to-be ex is. And I wanted you to explain it, and you have been doing that. You brought it up twice already. It's interesting that some people, when they marry, this is going to sound so familiar, when they marry, he or she's going to be perfect. I find this a lot with women. He's going to be perfect once I do this, that, or the other thing. And some men will allow themselves to be dressed a little differently, or just manipulated a little bit, but in a very soft way. But can you ever really change somebody?
No, you cannot.
And then if that's been the philosophy and the approach of one of the spouses throughout the marriage, you're getting divorced now. Handwriting on the wall?
Yes. I mean, they have no incentive to change for you at this point, now that you're getting a divorce.
And may I ask, should they even?
No. I mean, people need to look at themselves honestly and change behavior because they need to change the behavior. It's not about changing for another person. I mean, the only person you can change is yourself. And again, one of the reasons conflict continues is because people are trying to change the other person instead of looking at themselves. Like, what behaviors do I need to change? Do I need to get better with boundaries? Do I need to stop being so emotionally reactive? Do I need to communicate in a way that's doesn't create a lot of drama? When you're constantly focused on all the things you think your ex is doing wrong and how they ruin your life, like you just don't have the space to look at your own behaviors.
How do you get over that?
Radical acceptance. It's accepting that you cannot change another person. You cannot change the fact that you got divorced. You don't have to like any of these, but at a certain point, it's like, if you really accept that you have no power over that person, what is the most reasonable thing to do? I mean, you're just going to waste energy trying to get something to happen that's not going to happen. Or you can say, okay, I don't like the situation, but I'm going to think of what is really possible for me to do, and I'm going to direct my energy into doing that.
And when somebody does that, does the other person react maybe better?
I think sometimes they do, but it can't be a conscious thing. Again, you can't have the agenda of, if I change the way I write my emails, they're going to do this, so that's why I'm going to do things differently. That can't be the agenda. The intention has to be, I'm going to behave in a way that's in alignment with my higher self. That just serves me better. And so, yeah, because there's a dynamic with everybody. So sometimes if one person changes, the other person's going to change. But they might not, or it might take a really long time for them to change. So it can never be, I'm doing this to change that person.
It can't be, I'm doing this to change that person. it can be, and you can disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, it can be I'll get a more positive reaction out of that person, and a reaction that is not as combative. I'm not fueling anger.
Right. I would say, because I don't know if you'll get a positive reaction, but what I would say is you are not doing things that normally invite more conflict.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, now, back to grief, how does avoiding grief influence in any way divorce conflict?
So I think if you're avoiding the fact that you're sad because it's hard to feel sad, anger kind of covers up sadness. So you get stuck in this kind of blame position, or people like fight with their ex about, sort of the nitty-gritty of parenting that goes on in homes. That's not accepting that you didn't stay married, you don't see eye to eye on parenting. It's just not accepting that. I see so many fights about, they're not handling homework the right way. The bedtimes are wrong. There's too much TV. It's like, yeah, okay, maybe, but in the grand scheme of things, those are not huge problems, and better to just accept that, okay, we don't see eye to eye, but this is who my ex is. I can't control what they do in their house, and I feel sad. I feel sad that my marriage didn't last. What can I do now? What can I shift my attention to? And I think sort of another angle on that is when people feel that they're overwhelmed by their emotions, they can a lot of times resort to unskillful methods of managing their feelings, like drinking too much, drugs, just really kind of self-destructive behaviors because they just don't want to feel what it is that they're feeling. So, and when you're engaging in self-destructive behaviors, it's going to make everything else more difficult.
They're still covering up the sadness.
Right.
It is really hard to feel sad.
It is.
Dang. Even when you're not getting divorced, it's really hard to feel sad.
It is. I think now that I think about this, I think another reason that people stay angry and they stay in the conflict is because it's very hard to look at what you could have done differently. And there's a big grief piece about that, like, oh, yeah, I behaved in ways that were immature. Maybe if I'd done these things, that the other person, like it could have worked out. I wish I'd tried therapy or like, whatever it is. I mean, it's really hard to look at that. It's much easier to stay with what they did wrong. So you have to grieve also for the choices you made that weren't the best choices.
Yes. Responsibility. One of the things I talk about in divorce mediation is once we can accept the responsibility of our own input, of our own behavior, then decisions can be made easier. And the conflict goes down a little bit more because, again, you're not blaming the other person. Mm-hmm. It's so hard to do. But that's why I always also say divorce is a new beginning. Even though it is the finality of one type of relationship, if you can use it properly, like any hard situation that comes up in your life, you really can benefit by it.
Yeah, it's an opportunity for growth. I know that's a little hokey to say, but I genuinely believe that.
Cliches work, but yeah, I believe it too. I've gone through it, and it is important. Okay, I read something on your website that I think is really important to talk about. And I'm just going to read it. It's 2 sentences, and then I would like you to explain. You said, high conflict divorce occurs when 2 people are unable to psychologically disentangle themselves. Their divorce and custody arrangement may have been settled long ago, but one or both parties have never gone through the emotional divorce. please talk about the emotional divorce and how it makes or addresses a high conflict situation.
Right. So the legal divorce is just the legal divorce. You get your final judgment and the division of property is taken care of, custody is taken care of. That doesn't mean that you're emotionally divorced. I mean, people can stay emotionally tangled up with each other for decades, really. The emotional divorce happens when somebody works through the grief process, when they're able to take responsibility for their own behaviors, and when they realize that their peace of mind is not contingent on the way that their ex acts or on the fact that they're divorced. I think it's the inability to really take ownership of your own life and your own behavior that keeps people tangled up. And again, blame is the opposite of accountability. If I continue to blame you for the divorce and everything that ever goes wrong with the children, I don't have to look at my own part in something. So this person that you say you hate, you want nothing to do with, you are actually very emotionally connected to because they're sort of running your life because you've made them responsible for your peace of mind.
And then that keeps conflict going,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So in order to do the best for ourselves when we're approaching a divorce, do you think that pre-divorce therapy to address the emotional divorce may set people up for a better experience, if you will, filing and making those decisions?
I do, because I think it's helpful for people to kind of know what to expect going through the divorce, not just legally, but emotionally. I think it's important to know about the grief process, to know about the psychological conditions that drive a divorce, to work on acquiring some coping skills. It's just the more information you have, the more kind of internally stabilized you feel, and the more stable you feel, the clearer head you have when you actually sit down to, mediation or what have you, when you actually go through the legal process of divorce.
I had a client here the other day signing the judgment package, and he said something that I thought was significant. He said, "Time is a great healer. Everything else is business after that." And he and his soon-to-be ex-wife took 2 years going from filing the petition to literally doing the disclosure forms, which is the very next step after you initiate the filing. But that's what they needed. They needed 2 years. So do you meet at times with both people to get them set up for the emotional aspect of the divorce?
So I typically get people who are either going through a divorce that has been really bad, though they've already filed, or I get people after the divorce where they can't stop fighting. I wish I got more people before, because then they could really have time to do the work so that they can have a better divorce. When I've gotten them, it's already been, the apocalypse.
Well, and I happen to agree because 2 reasons. A, I had a client way back when I started, and she and her soon-to-be ex were just so sweet with one another. They came in, they met together when we filed, and they told me later on that they spent a lot of time getting healthy and ready to be single people and stop blaming each other. And I thought that was so mature. I thought that was fabulous.
Yeah.
And I thought it was fabulous because as I proceeded on in this business, I realized that the backdrop to the negotiations for the settlement agreement, whatever was in the settlement agreement, literally had to do with the emotions going on in the background. And I could tell when somebody was caving just to get it over with. I could tell when somebody was asking for something unrealistic, that if you went to court, it would never be abided. And this is why your soon-to-be ex is not agreeing. And that's why I am saying this now with you here, that I think more people should spend time in therapy before they even start filing, if you can.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
If it can wait, if you have the money, if those conditions are met.
Totally.
Because then your experience will be better.
Yes.
More respectful, calmer. It won't take away the sadness, but it'll just make it, I think, more manageable.
Yes.
So you did mention skills used to put our emotional acts together. So what skills can people build to grow to allow grief to be part of the emotional experience of divorce? What should they know?
So I want to talk for a minute about the nervous system and how the nervous system functions. So divorce is inherently traumatic. And when conflict keeps going, people get sort of re-traumatized. So that kind of makes the nervous system go haywire. There's sort of two extremes. So if somebody goes into hyperarousal, meaning they're sort of always waiting for a fight, they're always expecting the worst, they tend to be very agitated. They have extreme behaviors. They're really irritable. They can make mountains out of molehills because they're always expecting things to be really awful. Or they go into hypoarousal, which is very numb and checked out, dissociated. Like, this is too painful. I'm not going to feel it. So when you're swinging from one extreme to the other, you can't go through the grief process. Conflict keeps going. So the skills that you need to manage your nervous system appropriately, there's different skills, but I think it all starts with mindfulness. It all starts with slowing down your nervous system. When you're feeling upset, acknowledge what's going on, identify it. Right now I'm feeling sad. Oh, that's anxiety. Oh, those are intrusive thoughts. Oh, that's catastrophic thinking. This is really hard right now. And just because we talked about earlier, when you start identifying these feelings and experiences, they don't sweep you away as much. There's more of a space. And then you can make a conscious choice. So the conscious choice part is when people need things in their toolbox. Like, what are the things that you can shift your focus to that are constructive? Can you take a walk? Can you take a bath? Can you journal? Can you listen to some music? Can you do a guided meditation? I think people don't think necessarily of creative endeavors as skills, but they're incredible coping skills because accessing our creativity allows us to process things that I think even in talk therapy you don't necessarily get to. So if somebody writes about their divorce, or they play music, or they garden. First of all, it's mindfulness, because you have to be in the present when you're doing a creative endeavor. It's very hard to be in the past or be in the future. You have to focus on what you're doing. But it just has a way of kind of working through feelings, difficult experiences. So I really advocate that people, if they have any kind of creative inclination, to take that hobby back up during a divorce.
I think that's brilliant. I think that's brilliant in so many different ways, but essentially, I understand that comedians, actors, musicians, when they are upset, they pour themselves into their art, and it just evens them out. Mm-hmm. And through their art, they can address their feelings. Mm-hmm. They can make fun of themselves, self-effacing. Comedians do that all the time, very self-effacing. Musicians play music more than talk, but lyrics, mm-hmm. lyricists can put those feelings into words. And it's so constructive to mm-hmm. do that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent suggestion, Virginia. Thank you for that. What did you mean, and I hope you remember this, we'll see. What did you mean when you said to me in our previous conversation that emotional capability and reality have to work together in divorce?
I believe what I meant was that just having the skills to manage emotions. So it's one thing to be able to acknowledge, okay, my marriage is over. My ex is behaving in ways that I don't like. My kids are freaking out. It's another to have skills to manage your emotions so they don't overwhelm you. So both are really important. First comes radical acceptance. I'm divorced. My ex is who they are. I'm a single person again. And I'm having these overwhelming feelings. What are the skills I can use to manage my emotions so that they don't run my life?
And more than talking about it with friends, where do you sit on this? Yes, we have to share our feelings, but there's a point where don't we just have to go inside and be quiet and deal with our feelings?
I have a lot of thoughts about that. I think that maybe pick one or two friends that tend to be calm people, because what you do when you talk to a friend is they bring in all their baggage. You know, maybe they're having trouble with their spouse, or they're still traumatized from their parents' divorce, or they're really afraid for you, or they hate your ex and they sort of fuel the fire. It's really just not that helpful. Or a lot of friends give awful legal advice. You know, well, Aunt Sally, who lived in New Jersey 30 years ago, got enough child support to live forever. I mean, none of that, you know, your lawyer's terrible. No, do not ever take legal advice from your friends. But yeah, it's also like re-traumatizing yourself when you continue to tell that story. So if you must talk to a friend, talk to a calm friend, ask for feedback, ask your friend what's going on in their life. You know, you want to be a good friend. You don't just want to be the person who's taking. I don't think a lot of venting. When people come into therapy, a lot of what they think is they just need to get it out. And there's actually studies that show that getting it out just makes you keep wanting to get it out. Like, it doesn't really fix anything. So talk enough just to kind of acknowledge what's going on, and then shift your focus to, okay, what could I be doing differently right now?
Excellent. Yes, if I may, just for a second, I chose to talk to very few people when I was going through the divorce, and especially when it was over, I didn't want to hear from anybody. For 3 months, I went home after work and sat in complete silence. And I'm a media junkie. That TV goes on the second I walk in the house. I want to know what's going on in the world. But it was not the right thing for me as soon as the divorce was final. And I remember sitting for 3 months in silence. When I went home, I didn't discuss anything with anybody. And when 3 months was done, all of a sudden one day, I just didn't need to do it.
Wow. That's awesome. You instinctively knew what you needed to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was very happy about that because I really didn't want to hear what anybody else thought. I mean, it was my issue. It was my life. And nobody lives anybody else's marriage either, right? No. And unless you know all the financial details of your friend's divorce, I mean, what everybody makes and what their budgets are, it doesn't matter what your friend went through.
Right.
These are two different sets of numbers.
Right.
Yeah, I know. That's funny when people do that. I know this question, it's the last question I'm going to ask, and it may sound like it's coming out of left field, but it's the term called parallel parenting, and you actually referenced co-parenting earlier in our discussion. What is parallel parenting?
So parallel parenting, psychologically, it's a little bit like parallel play, which is a developmental stage that very young children go through when they're learning how to play together. So parallel play, this is going to make sense in a minute after I explain it. So you'll have two preschoolers in the sandbox, and they're playing side by side. They don't interact with each other. They don't even necessarily look at each other, but they're both playing together in the sandbox. And they're occupying the same space. That's a little bit like parallel parenting. Parallel parenting is for people where attempts to co-parent in a reasonable way, they just are not working. Because co-parenting requires people who have flexible thinking. It requires a lot of communication. So if two people are just embroiled in all kinds of conflict and every email exchange is like a threat, and co-parenting becomes very difficult. So parallel parenting means you try to have as little communication as possible. And people say, oh, that's terrible. The kids need to see us working things through together. Well, yeah, it would be ideal if you guys could be at the same birthday party together and smile and all take a picture together. But if you're glaring at each other or somebody's crying or, your kids are going to soak that up. Kids are much more affected by conflict than they are by whether or not you have the best divorce ever. So it's minimizing communication, doing things separately, hosting separate birthday parties, see if you can go to separate parent-teacher conferences, do curbside drop-offs. If the sight of the other person just is too upsetting, try to be with them as little as possible. And there's also, don't try not to talk on the phone, just use email. But there's different court-ordered, I know you email
there are different
programs.
Communication devices that allow people to speak essential information, and it won't allow cursing, it won't allow harsh words. It kind of mechanically does for you what it would be great if you could do yourself, but may not have the capability. And,
interestingly, I think when people go into parallel parenting, after enough time, when if the conflict subsides, their nervous systems calm down, then they may be more able to go back into co-parenting because they've had time to kind of regulate their nervous systems, and the world is no longer on fire. But if you're constantly fighting, that you can't resolve anything. You can't resolve anything about the children if you're just blaming each other and threatening and being defensive.
I know I said this was the last question, but there's a part two. It just occurred to me. How do you stop referencing the past? So you're co-parents and you're exchanging, and so you have a minute to talk either at the front door of the house or at the car or wherever you're doing the exchanging. And the snarky comments just keep on. We noticed that. It was a great example in the HBO series Divorce with Sarah Jessica Parker and I forget her wonderful co-star. But she could not let go of the past. And she was the one that wanted the divorce, interestingly enough. Any tips? You probably said it 50 times already in this interview. Any tips on letting go of the past, letting go of the level of expectation of your spouse?
Well, the past is past. Can't do anything about it. So snarky comments or bringing up the past and reminding your ex of things they've done wrong, it doesn't change anything. It's just going to make you feel bad because then you have to sort of go through it all over again. But I think if people can really get to the point where it doesn't change anything, blame doesn't change, dredging of the past doesn't change anything, focusing on all the things your ex does that you don't like, it doesn't change anything. So instead, focus on what is it that I absolutely need to say right now that's practical. Practical is, hey, I had to reschedule Sally's dentist appointment. It's next week at 4 o'clock on Thursday. Can you take her? Practical is not, I don't think that you're flossing Sally's teeth enough. And, the dentist says, blah, 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 none of that. It's just information. You just want to focus on information. And anytime you feel like an emotional charge, if you have an emotional charge in your voice, you need to slow down and step back from that feeling. So what we talked about, like acknowledge what you're feeling, slow down, take a breath. What is a skillful choice I can make right now?
But, this is interesting what you just said about instead of saying Sally, you're not flossing Sally's teeth as much. Well, what if there is something, Virginia, like the homework really isn't getting done properly, the grades are being affected, and by the way, the dentist said Sally's teeth need to be flossed more. So what's a more productive way of communicating that, or do you let the others communicate it?
I would, because I just had somebody ask me this, if there's really a problem in school, I would try to have it come from the teacher. I would ask the teacher to send an email to both parties. Same thing with the dentist, if the dentist can do that. I think it's easier for someone to get exactly the same information from someone they're not upset with.
Okay, that's brilliant. And I think that's one of the most helpful tips you could say to anybody. Let the neutral third party come in and deliver the information so that you can stay distant from it, so that the issues can be addressed, but you're not the bearer of that news all the time. This is great. So just to recap everything, we need to go through the grief process at some point, sooner rather than later. Maybe get some therapy for the emotional divorce before the filing to make that better, right? You're not going to change your soon-to-be ex. Don't even try. This is why you're getting a divorce. But the mindfulness, over and above all of that, the mindfulness to know where we are at when our bodies start telling us we're not feeling good, and just stop, right? Right.
That's if listeners take one thing from this podcast, it would be radical acceptance. It is the cornerstone of mental health, no matter what situation you're in. It's just the ability to accept life on life's terms as it is today. Doesn't mean there aren't things that you need to change, but you just need to accept life.
I love what you said, life on life's terms today. Okay, so perfect. So now how can people get in touch with you?
So people can go to my website, which is www.virginiagilbertmft.com. I've got blog posts on the website. They can call me. My number is 323-528-6747.
One more time.
323-528-6747. Email, which is vgilbertmft@gmail.com. You can follow me on Instagram, vgilbertmft, Twitter, vgilbertmft, or you can go to Amazon and get my book.
Which they absolutely should do.
Thank you.
That's a great book. That really is. I appreciate the time you've taken to come here. Thank you so much, Virginia.
Thank you, Judy. It's been a pleasure.
It was wonderful for me, and I know for our listeners. So that is the episode for Constructive Uncoupling, the podcast devoted to amicable divorces. I'm Judy Weigel, your host. I can be reached via email, Judy, Judy, at constructiveuncoupling.com. Judy, Judy, at constructiveuncoupling.com. And for specific divorce information, my company is Divorce Resource Inc. Divorce Resource Inc. And I'm all over the internet. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next week with our next episode. Take care.